Good morning. It's Friday, October 22nd, 2021. The controversy surrounding Dave Chappelle's remarks regarding the LGBT community continues to heat up, with employees at Netflix engaging in protests outside of the company's New York headquarters, while pro-Chappelle supporters fired back with counter demonstrations. Also, this morning, Republicans in the Senate have defeated a voter protection bill, and just wait until you hear what GOP South Carolina candidate or Senator Tim Scott is Friday, y'all, who is a black man, had to say. We speak with Muslim Journal reporter Katrina Hamilton and Washington Informer executive editor D. Kevin McNeir about those issues and perhaps even more this morning. Of course, the news headlines we will go through first. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe said he cannot afford not to worry about the coming November elections. Polls have consistently shown him with the overwhelming support of Black Virginians, but his victory may hinge on whether this core part of his base shows up in strong numbers. National activists worry that President Joe Biden's approval ratings and a lack of action by the Democrat-controlled Congress on voting rights and issues important to African Americans could spell trouble in a race with Republican former businessman Glenn Youngkin. The race already looks exceedingly tight, and any hint of waning enthusiasm among Democratic base voters could prove even more disastrous for the National Party in next year's midterm elections, when the party's narrow control of both congressional chambers is at stake. Reportedly, Black voters made up 11% of the national electorate in 2020, and 9 in 10 of them supported President Biden last year, playing critical roles in delivering close states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. So, one to watch. The Virginia gubernatorial race is about 2 weeks away, so we will see just how that shakes out. Also this morning, just 2% of federal criminal cases ever make it to trial, according to a Pew Research Center funded study. At least 90% of federal defendants end up pleading guilty. Why? Well, because of the RICO laws. When used, the RICO statute can frighten the bravest of defendants into submitting to a federal plea deal. RICO, which stands for Racketeering, Influence, Corrupt Practice, and Act, could result in at least a 20 years sentence added to whatever sentence a judge may provide in a guilty situation, and it also can lead to life in prison. And because of it's so broad, defense attorneys find themselves boxed in with little chance of success. One former special agent told us that in his career as a special agent, he said he handled a couple of RICO cases that were ultimately disposed of in other less draconian ways. However, Texas-based Joseph Gutierrez says that the law should be outlawed. He says Blacks and Latinos are predominantly the ones who have suffered under the law, where prosecutors have used that tool in drug trafficking trials where the property and assets of defendants are automatically seized, and the seizures often make it very difficult for individuals to raise bail or pay for their defense. And remember, the statute of innocent until proven guilty, well, the RICO statute pretty much assures that you can't prove yourself innocent. So it's one that we continue to watch and we continue to write about at blackpressusa.com and many of our newspapers around the country. This morning, D. Kevin McNeir, who is the executive editor of the Washington Informer and has written a column about the Dave Chappelle controversy, joins us along with Muslim Journal reporter Katrina Hamilton. They both have very, very strong assertions when it comes to the Dave Chappelle controversy, and we welcome both of them this morning. Kevin and Katrina, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, there's a couple of things we want to talk about before we get to Dave Chappelle, because I know both of you are very much loaded for this conversation. Let's talk about the Voting Rights Act in the Senate. It failed. Tim Scott, the Republican senator who led the negotiations with Democrats for the Republican Party, pretty much said that all of the racism, all of the anti-voter activities that the Democrats are saying existed 50 years ago. Everything has changed, and things are much better for Black folks. And I see it. Look, Katrina did like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I'm paraphrasing him, but that's pretty much what his message was, in saying that it was no need to pass a voter rights, voter legislation, the Freedom to Vote Act. Katrina, I'm going to start with you because I saw that very much visceral reaction.
I just want to say, because, we still have to keep Tim on our, our friends list because of the reparations, right? So we can't, tick him off too much. But the reality is, Tim Scott, a lot of folks around my age, Gen Xers, they did not experience the backlash of racism or anti-blackness in full perspective like our millennials are experiencing right now, or I won't even say baby boomers, but our previous generation before us. I'll say baby boomers and others. And so I think there's always this color blindness lens that, is internal. We talk often about internal racism, but we don't talk about that color blindness that even Black folks, possess. Like, oh, everything is fine. We're in the great world. We're in a post-racial world. But the reality is we're not. And we wouldn't be having these discussions if we were.
Yeah, and Kevin, last year after the George Floyd situation, there was this momentum to get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed, and this momentum to get other voter rights laws passed, and so since then we've had voter laws passed in Republican states, right? It hasn't been about voter rights. So what's going on, Kevin?
Well, I look back when Obama was running for president, when I was living and working at the Miami Times, and remember the lines circling huge blocks and people in the heat without water and staying on. I waited 3.5 hours to vote, and how proud people were. And the people who had never voted before. And there's this kind of excitement, the kind that my parents instilled in me when I was growing up in Detroit. We walked to the polls. And the more we've gotten involved, the more obstacles very quietly, heinously have been raised. Until now, there are all kind of blocks. And I think the colder, and I hate to say this, but the colder John Lewis's body gets, the more difficult it becomes. Because had we been able to pass a law right from the start, we'd have much more success. Now, if Biden really wants to be about this, he's going to have to use executive order, because it's going to be a standoff of the greatest heights.
It's going to be a fight to the finish. But want to say good morning to our chair who's watching, Karen Carter Richards.
Morning.
Jackie Hampton is watching. Claudette Perry's watching. Norman Rich is watching. My beautiful sister Nicole McDaniel is watching. Cheryl Smith is always watching. But we want to also say good morning to the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publicists Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. Dr. Chavis,
good morning.
Welcome. Good morning. Thank you so much on this Friday morning. And I just want to comment on behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Karen Carter Richards, our distinguished chair. And we represent, and you represent, 230 African-American owned newspapers and media companies across America. Freedom is a constant struggle. Remember, Obamacare went right down to the wire. They had to fight for it. Nobody gives you anything in America, particularly people of color and those who are the historic targets of racial discrimination. So it is going to be a fight right to the bitter end.
Yeah, right to the bitter end. And one last word on that before we move on to Dave Chappelle. Katrina, voting rights, what are you seeing out west? Kevin's back east, you're out west. What are you seeing out west? Is there any different or something that's going on out there that we should know about that could kind of tip the scales a little bit one way or the other?
So out here we have several layers. Number one, we have redistricting that's happening right now as we speak, and we have a lot. We have several seats, especially in Los Angeles County, which is our largest county, that are on the brink of we're on the brink of losing some, right? Because there's a black migration back down south. Folks can't afford to live here in California. It's ridiculous. Our homelessness has gone up, so we're losing a significant amount of a percentage of our black population, especially in areas where I grew up in, like Inglewood, where it's been gentrified tremendously. You go there now. I went there yesterday and it does not look the same. So that's what's happening. And then there's also an increased amount of apathy with our young folks because they see that things are not happening. We're not passing these George Floyd police acting laws, but we're passing other laws for other folks. And so they see this and they're like, you all keep telling us to vote these folks in office, but they're not doing anything for us.
Yeah.
And so we're not seeing what's happening down south just yet, but it's a different kind. It's, on the West Coast, it's always been, uh, covert. It's always been
Yeah,
under the rug anyway. So.
Kevin, we had Congresswoman, the distinguished Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton on the other day, and we talked about statehood, but we also talked about voting rights. From your vantage point as the executive editor of the Washington Informer, what are you seeing as far as any type of momentum? We obviously talked about the bill that was the Republicans unanimously voted down, and Tim Scott made his comments. But what are you seeing there in the district that could give people hope?
Well, I think, as Katrina said, what may be the solution for us, especially in the district, but also in Maryland, we're going through redistricting also right now, and as I call it, as the musical chairs move around. If we are able to hold majority black in certain key districts, those sections will be able to come up and people vote. Then you're going to have hear demands for statehood from those individuals, hear demands about voting rights laws. But as Katrina pointed out, our young people talk about defund the police and Black Lives Matter. And we've got to kind of spread that mess. I mean, Black Lives matter when it's convenient for it to matter. But Black lives have to matter.
Right.
And until we get our young people to see that, and older folk, so we are on one accord and we talk about that, it's going to always be selective Black lives. And that's what I see often. Black privilege lives or Black whatever lives, fill in the adjective. There's got to be a collective effort. And that's what King, even Dr. Chavis was about. They put the little stuff aside for the big stuff. Right now, we got a whole lot of little stuff going on in all 50 states and the territories. And this is a day of reckoning. We got about a year to get this together, because if we let this next presidential election come in, and we let the Johnny come lately come back, I'm moving to Canada. I don't know about anybody else.
He sounds like a lot of folks who we heard that during the Trump administration, right? I'm moving to Canada. But Dr. Chavis, I know you wanted to, before we move on to the next topic, I know you wanted to add something to what
Kevin said. Of the friends of the Black press, Topper Carew, up at MIT, he was also one of the founders of SNCC. This is the 60th anniversary of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I just think when we predict the future, the great thing about the Black press is that we not only read the tea leaves, we read the handwriting on the wall, we read between the lines, but then we have to advocate the message to the masses, because the masses are not going to get it from the mainstream. You have to understand, one of the reasons why you have all this voter suppression, one of the reasons why they're failing to pass the George Floyd, this is a reaction. They never intended for us to get where we are. January the 6th was a reaction. And some say it's just a dress rehearsal of what will happen. So I think that Black people, we have to be vigilant. And we can't let, as Kevin described, the little things or the big things dissuade us or make us become alienated, make us become hopeless. Every inch, and I use the word inch of progress because sometimes that's what it is, an inch. Every inch of progress you make, there will be a mild reaction to it. And so what we have to do is to focus like a laser and intergenerationally. We can't afford to have a generation gap between the old and the young. We can't have a consciousness gap between people who say they're conscious and people who we think are unconscious. I just happen to think that there's no such thing as an unconscious person. They're just conscious about different things. And I think that what the Black press does, we have to create the narrative that motivates, that inspires, and sometimes, yes, enrages. Because sometimes when we hear about reawakening, I know people talk about woke, but that's not nothing new. We've always had to give the stimulus with the truth to get people to stand up again, because this is a long struggle. This is going on now for 500 years. We talk about the last couple of years, this is going on for 500 years. And we have to make sure that on our watch, that we don't allow anything to retrograde to take place. We don't allow this situation to make us feel hopeless. We have more than reasons to fight back and to strive to make more progress, even in the face of these recalcitrant evils that continue to recirculate and redistrict in our communities.
Dr. Chavis, Kevin and Katrina, the controversy over Dave Chappelle's remarks at his special continues to reverberate. Here in New York, on Broadway, there was a huge protest at the Netflix headquarters. Kevin, I know you've written about it. Katrina, I know you have some thoughts. And in fact, let me just start with Kevin's comments there. You see that he wrote an editorial that ran in the Washington Informer. In fact, it's on the Washington Informer's website right now. And part of what Kevin wrote is this. He says, Chappelle admits that when he takes on a group of people, making the focus of his jokes, that he's also examining himself, seeking the similarities which he shares with the targets, quote unquote targets, of his musings, and working through the human process of better understanding those who walk along different paths. I applaud him for that, and I thank him too. Why? Because as a sane, gender-loving man of color, I have often found myself being unfairly criticized of the quote unquote T portion within the LGBTQ community. Those are the words of Kevin McNeir. Kevin, brief explanation of that, please.
Well, basically, I don't know who's out protesting in Netflix, but I doubt there's a lot of us. And when you talk about the letters within the LGBTQ community, there's always been this friction against transgender people. They are the outsiders, and so I understand their pain. And I think what Chappelle said, he said it succinctly on the show, on the show. He said, talking to a transgender person, and he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. It is her talking about what she was experiencing, how she was feeling. And she said to him, I don't need you to understand me. I just need you to believe that I'm having a human experience. You see, that's really where we are, and where I applaud him. When you go back through all of his shows, he's grown. He may not be where some people want him to be, but comedians are always people on the edge. That's what they do. They make us laugh, and then they make us cry. They make us angry, and then they make us happy. I don't criticize him because I think within the gay world, it's easy. And this is what I was telling our staff meeting yesterday. It's easy for a gay white man to go from being super gay to just super white. Takes off his gay cape, goes off. Now I'm a white man. Now I'm back to privilege again. Okay, well, I don't like the way I'm feeling right now. So when it feels comfortable, they can do that. Transgenders can't take the capes off. Black gays and lesbians can't take the blackness off. So within this whole movement, I just think there are a lot of people kind of pushing it a little bit too far. As I said in the headline for that, I just don't believe that it merits the backlash.
And with that, Katrina, the cancel culture, we gone too far? I mean, there are folks calling for Chappelle to be canceled. This is something that bothers many people, that just the slightest thing that a group might disagree with, they say cancel them. Kevin made a point too about the black skin. We as African Americans, that Dr. Chavis alluded, 500 years, right? Dave Chappelle has joked about and used the N-word, but never once in his career has, at least, I mean, if I'm wrong, correct me, a group of black people said cancel him.
Well, it's interesting because remember, I think all of us on this call or our show right now are old enough to understand or remember when Dave Chappelle was canceled before. So his show was canceled in the past. So I think, he's used to controversy. So when we're talking about Dave Chappelle himself, it's kind of like, okay, he's been down this road before. But when you're talking about the um, cancel culture applies to whom, right? It's kind of like going back to what Kevin said. There are certain groups that are, I don't want to say privileged, but I'll say more entitled, right? So I can go and I can say that I am, if I'm white and I am, part of the LGBTQ group, I can hide myself and not even come out and still have that entitlement. But if I'm black or transgendered, I don't. So, you know, for Dave Chappelle and the backlash that he's been experiencing, our cancel culture is always different, or our experiences from cancel culture is always different from other people. It always is, and it
So,
always will be.
so with that, Katrina, with that, Kevin, here's a question. Do we, as black people, we had Asian hate, right? And all hate is bad. We condemn, I know the National Newspaper Publishers Association condemns all hate. But do we have to always pick up the fight for Asian people, for the LGBT community as a whole, for other groups, when our fight we're still in the middle of a fight for our lives as black people. And so it's been that way. Dr. Chavis is an example of that. He comes from the civil rights movement, of course, but it goes back Jim Crow, it goes back slavery. We still have not gotten justice in this country. Somebody points out, Dave Youngblood says, when you call the police, do you call them as a transgender, or do you call them as a white person? As he's quoting Dave Chappelle. But we know that we still, every morning on this show almost, we're talking about another incident where a black person was targeted by police, where a black person was killed by a police officer, where a black person was falsely accused, or etc. Our fight, isn't it different than their fight?
It may be different, but I'm going to say, I think the reason why it matters that we're in the front line is because Black people have a sense of empathy that other people just don't have, generally speaking. That's because of the battles we've gone through, the 500-year battle. We start to understand, we see oppression clearly. Now, sometimes we are the oppressors, and make no mistake, but we see the oppression clearly. And I think in terms of the transgender and the transphobic nature, one of the reasons I wrote about this, and I would hope that Dave Chappelle would give me opportunity to speak to him, and let us speak to him, is for people like Abbott, who is changing the laws now back in Texas so that you can't go into the bathroom even though you're transgender. You can go to the other bathroom now. And because of children I've met here in Maryland, little kids who are transgender and being bullied and beaten up. Look, I'm 61 years old. I don't have to worry about some of that stuff, and know that I'm not going to. But I've got little kids. We got little kids who are identify as trans. They need a safe space. They need to be able to grow up and feel that they're not different. They just
And Kevin, let me stop you there because I have a question about that too. Now you mentioned little kids are trans. How is that possible? And this is I believe is a legitimate question. I need to be educated by you on this. How is that possible when a child does not? You don't want your child engaging in sexual activity at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. You're not teaching them about what you're learning as a, say, 14, 15, 16, 18-year-old. How is that possible? Are we now saying that we are assigning these kids their sexuality, or are we letting them grow into what that sexuality might be?
I think that's a much longer and deeper question, and then I had to start dealing with some issues of philosophy and theology and ethics and all those things. But I'm just going to say this: I didn't learn how to like trucks because all the other guys like trucks. I liked trucks. I didn't start, and when my desires for a woman or for a man, those things came from here. I didn't. There weren't lessons that I learned, although I observed other people's behavior. I just don't think it's out of the human possibility that some people feel differently inside. When you talk to a transgender person, because I will admit to you, Stacey, I can't understand some of what happens with transgender people, but that's how they identify. Just as my mother couldn't understand when I told her I was gay in my 30s. She couldn't understand that. And again, I go back to what Chappelle said. You don't have to understand. In fact, I don't care if you understand it. What you have to at least believe and accept that it is part of my human experience. Mm-hmm. And because we all have a right to live, I think we have a right to examine and develop our experiences, however they shape out.
Yeah, and David Youngblood mentions too, and I have to bring that up. He says gender is an identification, sex is an act, and he's absolutely correct. Katrina, I have to go back to the fact that when I was young, I had a white person spit in my face. I've had white people point guns at me. I was walking down. I was in California, in fact, one time when I was a little older, and had cops on Ventura Boulevard drive up to me, use their loudspeaker and say, "Hey, boy, have you had your watermelon this morning?" We can't take our black skin off. So, there's no coming out the closet as black.
There's no come out of the closet as black. And I wish we had more time for this conversation, because I'm looking and seeing that we're running out of time. And I would love to have brought Greer into this conversation. But one of the key points that we're missing with this too is that when we're talking about our black male comedians, and whether they're talking about sexuality issues or they're talking about gender issues, there's still this struggle with masculinity that our black males are portraying in comedy that we don't address. And our black women are at the brunt of all of this. Even when we're talking about the LGBTQ in this conversation, we're talking about the gay males, but we have not talked about the portrayal of, or transgender, but we've never talked about the portrayal of how Dave Chappelle and others bash, black lesbians. So we have to really start. Black is so complex, but I think at the end of the day, we have to really start looking at the way that we are focusing on the way we treat each other, black males and black females. And I think that will help strengthen our argument when we're looking at building our community back up.
Well, and Kevin mentioned about Chappelle's growth. One of the things that he used to do, I don't know if he still does it, I haven't seen his shows, but he used to, black women were on the front lines of his attacks too. Black women didn't protest, say cancel him. I think
that's because we have empathy for each other, that Kevin said before, right? But then who's protesting when folks are talking about us? Who's protesting when right? And no one's canceling these folks out. I shouldn't say no one. I just want to say really quickly, right now, Disney is showing a film. It's called The Reluctant Dragon from 1941. And they have like some undertone, transphobic, things going on there. But there are also characters of like black folks with huge lips, big, derrieres, and no one's protesting that.
No, the Simpsons have been on for 100 years,
right?
And they have ridiculed every minority group in history constantly.
And our children see this.
and our children see it, and no one says cancel they've been around. You know, the Simpsons were Fox's answer to the Cosby Show, believe it or not. And so you could see the problem that we should have with that, Kevin.
Well, look, I mean, I've got two grandsons, the one 17 and one 7. I've got two children, both grown. When I'm sitting down with my kids and something comes on, I remember one time and my son said, "Dad, look at the faggot." I'm not going to tell you what happened, but it wasn't a pretty picture. And I then, after we had our little tete-a-tete, I talked to him and I told him why words like that hurt. Now, at the same time, I helped him understand you're going to hear a lot. It's part of the common culture. It's part of the culture. So we don't have to always say, "Oh, take it off and whitewash the screen." I have to now put it in my mind, use my intellect to try to understand, are they being insulting? Are they using a term they think is okay to use? How do I appropriate that? There's something that has to go on up here. It's not visceral. It needs to go on intellectually first. And I've told them that's where it's going to happen. When all these comedians are trying to make us sit up, get our eyes open. Now, they've got a message. We can buy into the message or we cannot. Richard Pryor said nigga a whole lot of times. Come on now, let's keep it real. Kevin Hart is more G-rated. Comedians are along the spectrum. I don't need to protest Dave Chappelle. Just turn the daggone TV off.
There you
don't
go.
want to listen to David, don't listen to him.
Yeah,
I think he has some good things to say. Sometimes it's a little bit on the edge. But I live on the edge. I work for Black Press. It's okay.
Recently, Paul Mooney died, right? And Paul Mooney wrote a lot of Sanford and Son episodes. He wrote for Richard Pryor. Denise Rolock Barnes of the Washington Informer writes in that folks love Paul Mooney, who agreed to no longer use the N-word, but his routine continued to refer to women as bees.
Right.
You know, I think the voice that this show always looks for a reason is Dr. Chavis. Dr. Chavis, we want to throw it to you.
Well, first of all, Stacey, I want to thank Let It Be Known and the Black Press for daring to even discuss this subject. And then that's what the Black Press does. Our community needs clarity on all these issues. I want to paraphrase something that Dr. King said. He said, "An injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And I would say an insult to somebody's gender is a threat to everybody's gender everywhere. And we can't, Dave Chappelle is provocative. That's his genre of comedy. And we would not be having this discussion this morning if it were not for Dave Chappelle. Just think about that.
Yeah.
So why the people that now want to attack him? You know, the oppressor plants seeds among the oppressed, so they attack each other. And we're not going to have more progress if we continue to attack each other instead of trying to find the truth that we all carry, that we all bear witness to, and that we all should respect. Keep in mind, for 500 years, I'm going to be repetitive, there's been an attempt to deny our humanity. And when our humanity, I mean all of our humanity, 360 degrees of our humanity. We are a diverse people. We're not monolithic. We you know, and I think for society at large to try to put us in a box, in a square ring and say, this is how your humanity should be expressed. And if you express your humanity in this other way, then you are no longer human. No, I just think that the people who are calling the shots on television, on Netflix, on social media, we don't own it, not one social media platform, but we overindulge in it. We overindulge in television. We overindulge in radio. And the reason why is because we don't control our own narrative. And that's why, again, the Black Press is so important. We have to continue to plead our own cause. And our own cause is not determined by those that don't understand us, or certainly by those who've had centuries of attempts to deny our even being a human being.
And Dr. Chavis, to go along with what you're saying, Nicole McDaniel writes in that I also agree that Black men and women must be more mindful of how we treat and speak of each other in all genres, comedy, music, TV, etc., especially from Black men to Black women. And she also says more unity and respect is needed between us. And she recommends that we watch HBO's Exterminate All the Brutes when you can. I haven't seen it, but Katrina, you said race is a social construct used as a mechanism of control, divide and conquer. Can you elaborate just a little bit? And folks, we have gone over time, but we believe that this topic is extremely critical, that we just touch on the points that need to be touched on here. So thank you for staying with us, Katrina.
No, definitely. It is a racial construct, and we're using this, this platform right now, the Black press, powerful, powerful. But why is it that we don't have more, control of the media? Because of course, folks are going to say, "Oh, Black folks, they don't know what they're talking about. They're always at the bottom," And so we have to start controlling our own narrative. We really do as a people, because until we do that, we're going to have, Dave Chappelle, and Dave Chappelle, he's just probably like, whatever. But it's bigger than Dave Chappelle. And I think that's what we need to realize. Is if it happens to Dave Chappelle, it's going to happen to some of these other young folks who are coming up. And how do we, like Dr. Chavis said, how do we start making sure that we're connecting with our young folks? Are there any young folks watching our program right now? Are they hearing this message? And if not, how do we get that message to them?
Katrina, you echo Dr. Chavis. He has this conversation with the staff a whole lot about involving Generation Z, the millennials. In fact, there is a Generation Z that runs the NMPA's TikTok account, but Dr. Chavis is actively involved in making sure that young people are involved with the National Newspaper Publishers Association. I think more so than certainly than any other leader of this organization that I've seen. So you're right. We have to get the young ones involved. And Kevin, I know that at the Informer, Denise Rolock Barnes has done a great job of getting young ones involved and her staff. And also she has the bridge there that her son runs. So that's important too, right? The generations, continue it in the family, pass it down the generations.
Sure. Well, I think there are two things that have to happen. First of all, my youngest writer now, she's 21. I'm 61. We have a 40-year difference. I work with 7 newspapers, all Black. So when I talk to her, I tell her, I don't know what your expectations are, but let me share mine. These are my experiences. I'm building my experiences on those who came before me, the Sam Logans and people like that. So when we talk about the intergenerational, what's really important, and this is why when we talk about telling our story, I don't know if you've been in church before, and a preacher will say they're starting to start the sermon, and don't really want to read the whole scripture, so they'll say, "Oh, you know the story," and then they'll start going on. What the Black press does is we tell and we retell the story, because people don't know the story. And because they don't know the story, they don't know how to get into the story. They don't know how to interpret it or figure out how it makes sense to them. That's why I love being with the Black press. Because that's what we do best. Why? Because we know the story. We live the story. And we tell it in a way that our people understand. We let other people listen. You're not going to listen in. We want you to join the conversation. But I'm speaking of Black men, Black women, Black boys, Black girls, grandmothers, grandfathers first. Because more often than not, no one wants to speak to us as if we don't really know. So something about old Mother Wit, the grandmother Wit, that has gotten us where we've gotten. That's what we've got to keep doing with these pieces here we're talking about today. Yeah. We got to keep telling the stories. Going back to the Moonies and the Richard Pryors and the Flip Wilsons and the Moms Mableys, and you tell those stories about comedy. You don't just, Dave Chappelle didn't just exist and pop up, the brother from the hood in DC. Okay, there were people many years, decades, centuries even before that didn't get the chance to get up on the platform and have their say. I'm not saying it's going to be right on the others. But that's how we've got to tell that story. He didn't exist in a vacuum. Others lit the flame. Some were burned and went down, in effigy and whatever it is. There will be others after him. There were others before him. That's what it's all about, is us talking about those efforts. And once in a while, someone gets a chance to really speak.
And Katrina, I'm sorry, Kevin. Katrina, do we have to? Well, you're a journalist. I'm a journalist. We're not comedians, but do comedians have to offend to be funny?
I'm going to say no, maybe because I'm just a, dry, but, I think that, we can find other means of humor. But I mean, again, comedians historically, regardless of race, have offended people. That's how they make their, I don't want to say bread and butter, but that's how they make their money. And, they have followings for reasons. So if we're going to cancel Dave Chappelle, then we need to look back in the history books and cancel a whole lot of other folks, regardless of race. But I just really want to quickly say too that there was one researcher who said that racism still very much exists in America's landscape. And even though we feel like President Obama was the first Black president, and now some will say he's the first biracial president. So if that's the case, we still haven't had a first Black president, but that's a whole nother hour. I just want to say too that when I looked at the statistics, LGBTQ community is about 5%, but African Americans are 12%. So how is it? And their numbers have grown, and out of that, 3% identify as bisexual. But how is it that there is, communities like LGBTQ are more powerful than the African American community?
That's where I was going. That's exactly where I was going, Katrina. I'm gonna have to give Dr. Chavis his last word on this subject because we are definitely running out of time.
Again, Freddie Douglass said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand." And the reason why some groups have more power than other groups is because Black people, sometimes we are reluctant to make our demands. We're reluctant to plead our own cause. We're reluctant to face adversity front end. We wait for somebody else to go out there and then we collect the benefits. I'm just talking overall now. And that's why, again, the Black press is so important. And Katrina, we were so pleased to have the Muslim Journal as part of the NNPA. And I've been asked sometimes, why you let the Muslims in the NNPA? I said, are you crazy? I said, we are not monolithic. We are Christian, we are Muslim, we are Buddhist, we're Catholic, and guess what? Some Blacks are also atheists. But we've got to stop canceling each other out and making judgment on each other, to the extent to which, and because we rush to judgment on each other, that's part of the Willie Lynch syndrome. And I think that we have to avoid that. We have to rise above it. We can be articulate and discuss these issues without being divisive, without being judgmental toward one another. Dave Chappelle is our brother, and Mom's Mabel was our sister. And we should stop trying to be the judge and the executioner on one another rather than lift each other up. I'm looking for the greater good, not for the worse.
Yeah, well, and so speaking of the Muslim Journal, there's going to be a great Katrina, so you'll be aware of it. When we were in New York this week, Dr. Chavis and I, we had a chance to sit down with Ilyasah Shabazz. And that was an amazing conversation that you will read about at blackpressusa.com. And we're certainly welcoming the Muslim Journal to pick that up, as well as all of our other newspapers and media companies around the country. A fantastic conversation with Ilyasah. You don't want to miss it. And of course, Katrina, Dr. Chavis, Katrina will be a regular on Let It Be Known. We anticipate Katrina's bright smile every Friday morning to take us into the weekend. So we really look forward to her commentary each week. And Kevin, we got to continue this conversation. I think it's such an important conversation. I think our audience has responded to this conversation. So we know your schedule is tight, but we hope to get you back to continue this conversation, because I think we all agree that you come from a perspective that people need to hear.
Thank you.
Of course,
Good.
Dr. Chavis, you know what? The NMPA is fortunate that the president and CEO is named Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. Everybody, listen, thanks for joining us. If you have questions, concerns, comments about the subject matter today, please let us know, because we're going to talk about this again. And so you're welcome to participate in the conversation. We thank you so much for watching, and let it be known, oftentimes the best tonic to anger and being upset is yourself. Be quiet sometimes. Everyone, have a phenomenal and safe weekend. We will see you Monday.